Has there ever been a sportsman to match the bravery of racing driver Niki Lauda? Disfigured for life in a horrifying accident, he defied logic by winning 2 more world championships. Now he has to be a survivor in business too, with his own airline, Lauda Air.
Lauda has got 68 pilots now, and I'm one of them. So during the winter period I could fly a little less and do more office work. But now I'm back to normal operation, which would be between 70 and 80 hours a month. After being involved in motor racing for so many years, you have to find yourself a job which is more challenging and more hard and more difficult, because then you forget about racing. And aviation, I can tell you, is certainly what you need for that.
Johann Strauss, the name on Lauda's plane certainly strikes a very Austrian note.
Kapitän auf diesem Flug ist Niki Lauda. Das ist der Offizier der japanischen.
Behind the wheel, Lauda was always a cool, unemotional tactician and very fast. He brings the same qualities to the cockpit for his airline based in Vienna. He's always been totally his own man, never courting popularity at the expense of honesty. He can be prickly, but he's also revered years after his retirement in the mid-1980s. And yet this son of a paper mill owner won his 3 drivers' titles after being advised by his family to leave motor racing well alone.
First of all, I had to overcome my parents' fears, because they certainly did not agree me being a racing driver. They wanted me to join the family business, but I realized in time that when I was 18 I have to move out, and I moved to Salzburg, rented a 1-room apartment and started from scratch.
Nowadays, surrounded by the trappings of the executive, he recalls how he had to borrow £30,000 just to get a start as a driver. He had to go cap in hand. It wasn't easy.
The problem at that time was that you had to find a sponsor to get Formula 1 ride, like today actually. But at that time it was not easy to find a sponsor. So I went to a bank and said, give me a credit loan for 5 years, and I pay you the interest and pay the money back. And I got myself a credit, gave the money to March Engineering, and got that way my first Formula 1 ride.
That break came in 1971. It was to prove a humiliating experience. The car wasn't good enough, but the driver was, and Lauda was getting noticed, even by teammate Ronnie Peterson. He was snapped up by BRM. Then in 1974, Ferrari saw Lauda as the man to revitalize them. The Italian job was Niki Lauda's launchpad to stardom.
It was quite a funny situation, because in Monte Carlo I think I was lying in 3rd position in front of Jacques X with a Ferrari. And that was the race where Commendatore Ferrari asked, who is that guy in front of my car here? And the next day I was approached by Montezemolo to come down to the Ferrari factory to have a look around the facilities. And when I've seen all the potential which was available at that time, the own racetrack, the speed traps there all over the circuit, the test facilities, I was sure if you work hard that you have to make something out of that car. I had no experience whatsoever. I started 74 to win the Spanish Grand Prix, my first Grand Prix, but I made some mistakes. I mean, I flew off the road in Nurburgring in Germany. I flew off the road in Canada and really lost the championship, because I could have won the championship already that year.
But in 1975, the Grand Prix wins started to flow. Lauda was the best driver in the best car, and in a world where split-second judgments must be made at breakneck speed, Lauda was king. He drove his Ferrari to the championship of the world for the first time. You could keep the champagne though. Lauda was never one for the trimmings. But when it comes to letting his passengers sip the bubbly, well, that's different. All part of the Lauda Air service. The cool, methodical qualities he brings to running his airline are the ones that helped him to 25 Grand Prix wins from 171 starts, amassing 420 points over 12 years. Typically, though, he gave all the trophies away to a local garage. In this most glamorous of sports, it was the winning that Lauda really relished.
I think you have to be honest to yourself to make sure that whenever you do something wrong, you correct it quickly and do the right thing in the future. And you have to have a good car. And the Ferrari at that time, after all the testing we did put in, it was a very competitive car.
Then, as Lauda was well on the way to retaining his title in 1976, came a moment indelibly printed on the minds of a generation of motor racing fans.
I have no memory of the actual accident. I've seen it a couple of times in television. And when I look at it in television, I think somebody must have had a huge accident here, because even looking at it, I can't remember a thing about it. But I certainly did realize when I was in the hospital, then the memory came back. And I certainly remember the time where I thought, now I'm going to die. And it was very close. I tell you, it wasn't funny. It certainly woke me up, and I really put all my strengths together to stay alive, because suddenly I've realized when I let go now, it's the end.
Lauda received the last rites. His face was grotesquely burnt, his lungs damaged by scorching fumes. His life hung by a thread.
I had a terrible time after the accident driving again. I would say it took me about 5, 6, 7 races before I could really drive without any more fear about it. And then I was back to normal. So 5 weeks after my accident, I was back in Monza driving the Ferrari again. And the first day, I just couldn't drive at all. I nearly shit in my trousers, to be honest. When I left the pits, I had to stop practice because I couldn't do it. I went back to the hotel, I thought about it, I got myself confident again, and then slowly I got going again.
Yes, unbelievably, 5 weeks after the crash, he was back. But Britain's James Hunt took the title by a point that season after Lauda quit in Japan. Conditions too dangerous, he said. Another calculated decision. But now Niki Lauda had a new passion: flying aeroplanes. His comeback in 1976, though, will long be remembered. Another great champion, Jackie Stewart, called it the bravest thing he'd ever seen in sport. Still bearing the unsightly scars, Niki Lauda regained his World Drivers' title the very next season. But his interest in planes was growing. He walked away from the politics at Ferrari, and 2 years later, in the midst of practice for the Canadian Grand Prix, he decided the motivation had dried up. He was on the next plane home, but his own airline had trouble getting off the ground.
I completely underestimated the power of our government protecting our national carrier. They didn't give me any license, they couldn't give me any traffic rights, so I had really a hard time for 2 years getting a stupid propeller airplane going. And really I couldn't achieve what I wanted because I underestimated the power of our government together with Austrian Airlines. So I went back into racing just to make sure I come back at the right time with the right knowledge and with the right power to fight the establishment.
Lauda had been away 2 years. He was lured back into Formula One by the new challenge of the difficult ground effect cars. Could he conquer in these new machines? Well, using his guile to foil the blistering speed of Alain Prost and aided by a baby food diet to keep him trim, he was champion all over again in 1984, this time for McLaren. In 1985, though, Lauda retired for good. He still retains his connections with the sport and with Ferrari, where he advises the new generation of drivers.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Your pilot Niki Lauda speaking. Information out of the cockpit. 39,000 feet on course to Atheni, then on to Skopelos, Saloniki, up to Rugas. Straight over Yugoslavia to Belgrade, a right turn to Calais, Budapest to Vienna. The weather route is fine, so in Vienna the temperature in the moment plus 5 degrees Celsius. We started our scheduled service because of the political situation, flying to Sydney. I mean, normally you start flying to Zurich, and if you make it to Zurich, you go to London and you slowly build up. But because of the stupid situation with Austrian Airlines, where they forced the government not to give us any license, I had to pick the furthest point in the world because they didn't want to go there, and I said, why can't I?
Now came a disaster which hurt him far more than the crash at Nurburgring. A Lauda Air jet crashed in Bangkok, killing 223 people.
The biggest disaster in all my life, because it was not at all Lauda Air's fault. It was a Boeing problem on the aircraft. But why does it hit me with 2 airplanes of that type when other airlines fly 50 or more. Why don't we have to go through all this terrible experience? I really don't know. I lost total confidence in everything, because when you see in the jungle of Thailand 223 bodies lying around and your own airplane in million pieces, I can tell you, you will never forget that. Today I have no more problems because I know exactly what they've done to the aircraft. A thing like this will never ever happen again. Unfortunately, it had to kill 223 people to realize the changes they had to do. Motor racing is completely different because I go into motor racing myself. I know the risk. I want to take the chance, and this is my own responsibility. So if I hurt myself or kill myself, okay, I've been in motor racing. But why those 223 people have to get killed on another airplane? This I will never understand.
Lauda Air has been cleared of all blame for the crash, but once more Niki is trying to rebuild. And what other airline executive do you know who actually goes around cleaning his own planes?
If I look back myself, I can always see things coming along quite well, and then there's a sudden interruption. And I have to sometimes start all over again. I don't know why that is, but this is certainly been through all my life until today. So I hope that the downdraft doesn't come that heavy as it did come to me last year. Lauda 678, Fiskas level 390.
Lauda 678, go that...
That Niki Lauda is here at all, never mind flying aeroplanes, is a minor miracle. He hopes the turbulent times are over as he heads for home. It's a home in which he does, by the way, keep one trophy from his first Grand Prix win at Jarama. He says it's useful for keeping safety pins and rubber bands in.